The interim leader of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, is without doubt the most popular person in Africa right now. And his brand of populism that centers anti-imperialism and African sovereignty is gaining widespread acceptance across Africa and the African diaspora. Anytime I hear him speak, I notice traces of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, and Thomas Sankara. It seems like he's singing from the hymns written by these African luminaries. So this week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to examine the words of Ibrahim Traore and find how they align with the words of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, and Thomas Sankara. So I'm going to base my examination on what I'll call his geopolitical manifesto. That means what he's trying to achieve on the global scene, and examine with what the philosophies that Kwame Nkrumah, Lumumba, and Sankara laid in place. My name is Nenebi Tony. I'm a Ghanaian writer based in the US, and I tend to speak a lot on foreign policy from Ghana and other African countries. There's been a lot that has been said about him, so I'm not going to bore you with the details of his political actions. I'm going to focus on his philosophy and his geopolitical movements. Because I like to focus on intellectual conversations, that's what I'm going to do on this episode. So let's start. There are three things I've noticed to be themes that run anytime Ibrahim Traore make public utterances, especially when he's speaking in other countries. Number one, neo-colonialism and anti-imperialism. I've heard him use the word imperialism, which gives rise to the thought that he probably has studied the messages on imperialism that have been shared by the like of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, and other anti-neo-colonialist African leaders. Number two, we are going to speak on African unity and African self-determination. Those also themes that I've heard him speak on. And again, whenever he speaks on this theme, I see traces of old luminaries. And most importantly, I'm going to speak on realignment. The global order is in disarray right now. The US used to be the number one global power. The US is still the number one global power. However, actions of Donald Trump is shifting the whole world away from the US order to a more diverse order. I'll just put it that way. People are now seeking new ways to be realigned on the global scene. And on this episode, I'm not going to speak too much about Donald Trump. Let's start with imperialism. And I'm quoting a speech Ibrahim Traore gave in 2023. He said, Burkina Faso faces the most barbaric, the most violent form of imperialist neo-colonialism. And he called African leaders puppets who dance every time the imperialists pull the strings. These words sound like they were taken directly from the 1960 book Dr. Kwame Nkrumah wrote on neo-colonialism. This caught my attention because he used the words puppets, used the word imperialism, and he used the words neo-colonialism. Those are three words Nkrumah used in the 1960s because Nkrumah said the African leaders in the 1960s were becoming puppet governments of the Western imperialist powers. And he said that there were a new colonial power grab by Western leaders on Africa. And he said independent African countries were becoming independent de jure and independent de facto. So they were independent in name, but still dependent on their global powers. And if you know history, you know this was actually the case, and it's still the case today in countries like every Francophone country in Africa, really. Every Francophone country have what we call CFA franc or CFA, which is their currency, and their currency is backed by the French currency, right? So almost every Francophone country in Africa still hold allegiance to France. So while they are independent, they are still sort of like puppet government of France. That is a fact. And if you know me, if you don't know me, welcome. Subscribe to my channel and then you learn more. If you know me, you know I am not a communist, I'm not a socialist, I'm actually pro-capitalism. But the French hold on Africa is anti-capitalist, if you ask me. But that is not the point of this conversation. And that is one of the issues that Ibrahim Traore have spoken on publicly whenever he talks about the relationship between France and Francophone countries in Africa. And other African leaders have echoed these sentiments. Ibrahim Traore seems to be quoting directly from the hymns that have been written by Kwame Nkrumah whenever he uses phrases like puppet government, imperialist, neo-colonialism, you know? And Patrice Lumumba has said that the colonialists care nothing about Africa for their own sake. They are attracted by Africa's riches and guided by the desire to preserve their interest in Africa against the wishes of the African people. So Africa is Africa for African people, and colonial powers seems to be interested in the resources of Africa, but not the African people. And this is something that Thomas Sankara have also said. Thomas Sankara said, Africa for Africans, Burkina for Burkinabe. That is a direct slogan by Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso. And this anti-imperialist sentiment have been echoed by Ibrahim Traore, so I'm just pointing this out. So, number one, we've established that he knows the language of anti-imperialists and uses the language of anti-imperialists. We have that. Number two, let's move to African unity. I will start with Thomas Sankara saying Africa for Africans, Burkina for Burkinabe. The conversation has been that Africans, if we can become a force on the global scene, needs to be united. And how is Africa going to be united? Many people have tried, but have not been successful. But they've laid blueprints for how Africa can be successful if we are united. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah said his lifetime mission is to create a united act of a united Africa. So if you are from Ghana, you know that Kwame Nkrumah has been accused of trying to become the president of Africa by wanting to create the United States of Africa, which is untrue. He wanted all the states of Africa to come together, to be united, to become a force. European Union actually is the United States of Europe. So all of Europe deals with the rest of the world like they are one country. It is so crazy that if you're a country in Europe and you pass a law in your country which doesn't align with EU's guidelines for your country, in some countries like Germany, EU trumps the country's laws. There is no country in Africa where the African Union trumps the African country. So while Western powers have this thing where they speak with one voice, whenever African countries want to be united and speak with one voice, Western powers try to demonize it and create the notion of somebody is power drunk. Bro. And actually, funny enough, that is actually the cause of Brexit. UK left the European Union because the UK felt like the European Union was having too much power over their country, right? So it is an age-old strategy that works, that if you are a big bloc, when you come together, it's easier to negotiate with the world. If all African countries were together and negotiating with the UN, with the US, with Europe, we have a more powerful voice than if it's one country. The whole Africa can't speak with one voice because each African country represents a different interest, which is something that Kwame Nkrumah actually spoke against when he said our objective is African Union now. There is no time to waste. We must unite now or perish, which is something more the name. Patrice Lumumba also said all of Africa is irrevocably engaged in a merciless struggle against colonialism and imperialism. So the aspiration of the colonized and the enslaved people are everywhere the same. So all of us Africans in Africa and Africans in the diaspora have the same aspiration. So we need to come together. And Thomas Sankara said that we are repaying debt as the capitalists want because we are disunited. So these three people have all spoken about unity, and Ibrahim Traore said that Africans share destiny of the people of the upright. Shared destiny. Unity. Let's go to the third one. Realignment. So a lot of people don't know this, and I make it a point to bring this up every single time I have the chance. I can be in a conversation with people, we can be talking about the rainbow, and I'll bring up the fact that Ghanaians fought in World War II against Nazi Germany, and we helped the Jewish people to stand as they are today. Because we sacrificed our men. Ghanaian soldiers actually lost their lives in World War II fighting for the world and Jewish people against Nazi Germany, you know? And a lot of time when you hear stories about World War II and you hear the great things that were done by the powers, I've forgotten what they are called, in World War II, Africans and African soldiers are not included. The only country which sort of acknowledges the role Africans play in World War II is Russia. And so this year when Ibrahim Traore was addressing the summit between Russia and Africa, he said that Africa and Russia have the same history of being the forgotten peoples who fought against Nazism. That is true. And this talk wasn't just a talk. It was Ibrahim Traore voicing his want for a realignment between Africa and the Eastern Bloc instead of the Western Bloc of the world. Personally, I don't really have any personal feelings about that yet. I don't know how I feel about Russia, but I don't think Russia cares about Africa too. The United States and European Western powers don't care about Africa. Russia don't care about Africa. Nobody really cares about Africa. So it doesn't matter which power Africa is aligned with. But there's been a lot of sentiments by African leaders to be aligned with countries like Russia, China, and India these days. I don't know how that will play out. President Trump is not really helping matters because he keep making moves that make these countries feel like they're not welcomed by the United States. You know, it is what it is. And so a lot of African countries, including Ghana, Nigeria, and Burkina Faso, are part of what we call not aligned movement. And a non-aligned movement is a movement where we believe that we make foreign policy decisions based on what is in our interests in the moment and not what the parties do. So our foreign policy decisions are influenced by issue and not party. So countries like the US and Europeans are part of NATO. So NATO makes decisions based on parties. So if you are a NATO power, if you have issue with a non-NATO power, NATO powers are likely to be on your side just because you are power of NATO, right? If you are a member of the non-aligned movement, you can be on the side of an issue for NATO or anti-NATO. You don't have to take a side. That is what non-aligned movement is. That doesn't mean that you are passive. A lot of time it means that you are basing your decision on the issue and not the parties. There's been a lot of times where Ghana have agreed with the US on things which are unpopular. There's been times where Ghana have agreed with Russia on things which have been unpopular. Take a side based on the issue. You understand what non-aligned is? Good. These days, the non-aligned partners are beginning to see that it is in our interest to move more towards the eastern side of the world than the western side. And so they are doing that. I personally have made videos in the past talking about how I do not like how China is moving in Africa. That's just my personal opinion. But a lot of African leaders seem to agree with how China is moving, how Russia is moving. And Ibrahim Traore happened to be one of them. So I am saying all this to say Ibrahim Traore's manifesto aligns with the philosophy of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, and Thomas Sankara. However, I can't say for sure how the manifesto playing out in real life were aligned with the vision of these leaders. I'll leave that to you all to make a decision. You can tell me in your comments if you think Ibrahim Traore's movement is in line with his manifesto or not. Subscribe to my channel, and next week I'll come at you again with another episode. Of course, later this week I'll post another episode on another topic, but on this topic, talk to you next week.